Okay, thanks to Yossi for hosting, and good to see everybody. It's been a while since we were online together. We traveled a bit, and now we're back, Baruch Hashem. So it's good to see everybody. If I don't see your faces, at least I see your names. And at some point, we'll tell you about our travels, but tonight we're going to dig right in and talk about a very controversial and difficult subject. Basically, what I call halacha versus humanity, dealing with the whole spectrum to some extent of LGBTQ and how halacha treats this community. I told some people that no, LGBTQ does not stand for Lubavitch, Ger, Bobover, Tells, Karliner. No, I think we all know the symbols, and there usually is a plus at the end, which accounts for all kinds of other sexual orientations. It is indeed a very controversial and important subject because, according to most estimates, 5 to 6% of the population fits into this community of homosexuals, lesbians, transgender, queer, etc. And there have been a number of publications and communications trying to come to grips with what is the appropriate way for the halacha to treat this community. I guess we have to begin by saying, and it's obvious, this is no news to anyone, that the Torah does forbid homosexuality, both for males and females. There is, as we know, somewhat of a halachic difference between male and female homosexuals. Lesbianism is in a slightly different category because there is no shichvat zera when it concerns women. There is no emission of seed or sperm, which is a specific violation of the Torah, shichvat zera lashav, which is one of the main issues concerning homosexuality. Nevertheless, that would not make lesbianism permissible, just on a punishment level, perhaps less culpable. But having said that, and I think pretty much all of the Orthodox opinions regarding LGBTQ would maintain that there is a Torah law against it. However, once it's a reality, how do we deal with it? And I think the first statement that needs to be made is that everything has to be put in perspective. We live in a society, first of all, where essentially everyone is in the category of Tinok Shanishba. Tinok Shanishba literally means a child that was kidnapped. We use it halachically to refer to a situation where people are not fully liable for their own actions based upon the community in which they live. We are not in a closed community. We are living among peers and wider communities where there is a great deal of transgression of things the Torah may forbid, and we cannot fully accuse someone of knowingly, willingly, maliciously violating the Torah. It may just not simply, it may be a case of peer influence, that people are affected by the society in which they live. And as a result of that, we have a slightly less severe critique of them. The best example of this is Shabbat observance. And whenever discussing any other issue, you have to factor in the fact that on a halachic level, there is nothing that is more severe than willful violation of Shabbat. The penalty for that, the punishment for that, in its most severe form, is mitah bidei adam, is execution, not by the hand of God, not on a spiritual level, but actually by a beit din where people could be executed. And we, of course, don't do that today. And even in times past, it was rarely done, although it's a misbelief, or it's erroneous to believe it never was done. It was done. The Gemara talks about it in certain extreme cases to protect usually the sanctity of the Shabbat, especially in communities where there would be a strong influence of people who are violating Shabbat influencing others. But today, this is non-existent. And I want to frame our discussion from the background of the fact that if we do not punish people who commit this most serious of transgressions, and we know that we are surrounded, of course, in Jewish communities by those who are not yet, let's say, Shabbat observant, then we can certainly extend it to to issues where there is a lesser transgression. Now, I want to, before I go any further, because people ask, well, what does this have to do with the Parsha of the week? So I want to connect to two issues that are in the Parsha. We have not only Vayakel Pekudei, but we also have Parshat HaChodesh. In Vayakel Pekudei, we talk again, we've been doing this for several Parshiot, about the construction of the Mishkan. And in the Mishkan, the central focus was the Kodesh Kadashim, in which there was the Aron Kodesh that held not only the set of the Luchot, the Ten Commandments, which Moshe brought down for the second time, the whole set, but also the broken set. And a lot of people ask the question, why is the broken set of the Luchot in the Aron? Because in a sense, it reminds God, maybe reminds the community, but also reminds God of a transgression in last week's Parsha of the Egel Zahav. They worshiped the golden calf. Moshe either broke the Luchot or let go of them, so they broke on their own. There's two opinions. And so why do we want something that is reminiscent of a cardinal sin which the Jewish people committed? And one of the answers is that, yes, it's true. The people sinned and the Luchot were broken. It was a terrible incident, but God loves all of the Jewish people. And although this is reminiscent of something negative that happened, nevertheless, Hashem wants to show that I don't abandon my people even when there's punishment for sin, but I don't abandon my people. And even if they are quote unquote broken, like the Luchot, nevertheless, they're still my people. That's one comment. The second comment that I think goes with it is in Parshat HaChodesh, we say, and we'll read, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. This month, says God, is given to you. This calling of Nisan, the first month in the calendar, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, beginning again the Luach. And the idea of Lachem is that we have the ability to manipulate the calendar. We set, before there was a fixed calendar, we would set when the month began by recognizing the new moon. And we would add a leap year, a leap month, Adar the second, when it was necessary. So Hashem says, I'm giving you people on earth a certain power. And the calendar is vitally important as to how we keep the Chagim, as to how we run our lives. And that's put in human hands. And part of the significance of that is that God does give us a certain power. Lo b'shamayim, the Torah is not in heaven. It's given to us as human beings. And God, in a sense, restricts himself, retracts himself, and says, I want you to have some power and you to be able to decide certain things. So when we talk about an issue of LGBTQ, I think we're touching on both these issues. We do have the ability to think for ourselves, to try to, without going outside of the Torah, staying within the boundary of Halacha, and yet use our God-given ability to do whatever we can, especially regarding those communities that maybe other people are writing off. I don't want to call them broken like the Luchot, but I want to say that it is a community that is under a tremendous amount of pressure and critique. And I think we have to kind of open ourselves up to the possibility that maybe we can work within the Halacha in order to merge humanity and Halacha. So having said that, I want to go into some specific issues as well. But I started off by saying that, yes, the Torah is clear in its prohibition of homosexuality. It is called to'eva, an abomination. In some of the strictest language, Rav Moshe Feinstein calls any instance of homosexuality to be despicable and to be disgusting. And, you know, Rav Moshe was the great decisor of almost an entire century. Rabbi Lamb from Yeshiva University refers to it in the context of onus, that a psychological or emotional disease that one would be almost forced to do against his or her will. This is also a definition which is certainly not politically correct today. But I suggest that there are new approaches being taken, because there are many rabbis today who want to factor in some of the, let's say, if not commandments, certainly some of the necessity in society of two things. One is Darchei Noam, that is trying to choose the most pleasant path that we can, so that we treat people in a dignified manner, and v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, essentially, which means don't do to others what you wouldn't want done to you. And once you factor that in, which the halacha does, we sometimes find that there can be a way to treat a situation with much more compassion and empathy and sympathy than if we just judged it strictly on the prohibition. A couple of examples. Even when someone is convicted of a capital crime, the Gemara in Sanhedrin says they have to be given a dignified death. They cannot be given a cruel death, whether we can get into the fact of the forms of execution in biblical law, whether they're cruel or not. But the Gemara talks about that and says, yes, the person committed a crime. Nevertheless, they're a human being. They're at Tselem Elokim. They went wrong. They'll be punished. But be careful that they are also treated with a certain human dignity. We talk about this unusual case of the Ben Sorer Omoreh, this belligerent and destructive child that the Torah talks about executing, even though others say there never was an execution. But there too, the Gemara says that when we, in the opinion that rejects executing him, says that's too cruel. The Torah is not meant to be cruel, and therefore, although it may be on the books, it doesn't mean that it ever happened. We've had recently a number of different incidents and situations that have really required us to think about this issue of LGBTQ. One of the incidents that we may be familiar with is what happened at Yeshiva University. Yeshiva University has Orthodox, religious, quote unquote, students who formed a club, what's called the YU Pride Alliance Club of gay students. And they demanded to have equal access and equal facilities and on-campus support for LGBTQ students. And it became a celebrated incident because they forced the issue to the courts, and the courts, needless to say, in America, are very much on the wavelength of the LGBTQ and ruled that Yeshiva University, on grounds of religion, cannot restrict an equal access and an opportunity for those students to have their own extracurricular program. And in the end, Yeshiva University, although they fought it initially, they bowed to the courts. And it's interesting that the Mashgiach Ruchani of Yeshiva University, who was actually my high school principal, Rabbi Yossi Blau, came out very much in favor of dealing with this issue from a sensitive, humane, and benevolent kind of way, in understanding that these are individuals who are committed to keeping the Torah. They're not doing this lahachis. There is a problem if the people involved are doing this in a destructive way. That actually can be very problematic. And indeed, there are a number of rabbis who have come out and who have said that as long as this is not being done in order to in any way attack Judaism or attack the Torah or attack Halacha, then they have to be dealt with in a very sensitive manner. Many of these people have issues that can be compromised, that can be exacerbated if they're not dealt with a certain amount of sensitivity. It's a tremendous amount of harassment, of bullying. So YU actually created a sensitivity training for the faculty and staff of YU with all kinds of anti-discrimination policies and a support group for LGBTQ students, and is taking an interesting approach that may be indicative of what's coming in the future. Rav Melamed, one of the best known of the Israeli rabbis, said, as long as the act of a person is not one of religious defiance, then why should they be treated any differently than those who don't keep Shabbat, as we said before, don't keep kosher, and various other, some want to say those people who are guilty of abuse, or who abuse may be a little different because it's obviously much more focused, but anyone certainly who is doing this not because they're on a campaign against Judaism, then they should still be treated with respect and with a certain amount of dignity. I'll read you one quote from one rabbinic organization. Jews with homosexual orientations or same-sex attractions should be welcomed as full members of the synagogue and school community, as appropriate with regard to gender and lineage. They should participate and count ritually, and be treated in the same fashion, in the same halacha hashkafic framework as any member of the synagogue they join. So when we look at some of the specific issues dealing with LGBTQ, we can see how this posture is practiced. For example, can someone who is gay receive honors at a synagogue? Can he be called up for an aliyah? And almost all rabbis, not all, there are certain extreme, and we unfortunately, without getting into politics, have in our government some individuals who are clearly homophobic, but most rabbis would say they're basically have the same rights as anybody else. In a sense, you check your sins at the door when you walk into a shul. We don't give a person any kind of polygraph to ask them, are you a Shabbos violator? Do you eat non-kosher food? They walk into the shul. There can be a member of the shul. They can be called for any honor. And there should be no reluctance about that at all. I remember in one specific case, and when I was rabbi of a shul, an individual came to me. He told me he was gay and asked whether there'd be any discrimination. I said, no, there won't be any discrimination. We certainly don't want to make an issue of it or an issue where you're flaunting it, just like we would not want somebody flaunting Chilul Shabbat. And you'll be entitled to any of the same honors and benefits of the shul like anybody else. I'm naming of a baby or a brit milah of a child that comes from a same-sex marriage. Why would we deny that child a brit? It's become, especially in a situation where the parents are observant. This is being done out of a desire to fulfill a mitzvah. The same would be for end of life issues. We would not treat anyone differently when they're ill, when they're dying. We don't make judgments about who committed sin or what sins they committed. There was this whole controversy during AIDS, people wanting to say this is a God-given or divinely sent punishment, which is ridiculous. We would treat an AIDS patient like we would treat a cancer patient or anyone with a disease, and we don't make a judgment about them. However, there are some issues that are more complex. One of them, for example, would be acting as a shliach tzibur. Would somebody who is gay be allowed to get up and lead the shul in davening? Let's say in the extreme example on Yom Kippur. And here I think we would have to say that being a shliach tzibur is connected to the will of the congregation. Shliach tzibur means the chazan is someone who is an emissary and representative of the congregation. So if you have a congregation that would not consider this person to be their proper representative or the majority of the congregation, that is something that you'd have to take into account as to who you would accept to be a chazan. I would say some of these issues relate to teaching. The next issue that's going to come up: can these individuals teach Torah? Can they teach children Torah? And Rav Meidan gave the answer that if they are not sexually active, then yes. And of course, the Torah teachers, they're observant. We're talking about observant people. They would be permitted to do so. And Rav Meidan from the Gush, as long as they are celibate, yes. We should also take into account that what we define as homosexuality or acts of homosexuality may be very different than what actually is occurring. It does not necessarily involve anal penetration, and that may be something that's specifically problematic. But again, we're not making people fill out a form. We're trying to accept, or we're trying to accommodate those who legitimately want to be part of the Jewish community, want to be observant, but this is something that for one reason or another, and we don't consider it something which is being done as any kind of overt act against Judaism, and therefore we are going to try as best we can to deal with them in a humane fashion. And I think this is becoming more and more prevalent. When we deal with people on an individual level, we generally see them in a very different light than an abstract decision. Should they or should they not be a part of our community? When you get to know people on a human level, you almost always have a connection to them. I won't necessarily say sympathy or empathy, because a lot of them would say, we don't want sympathy. We're comfortable with our lifestyle. This is something we've chosen. Most rabbis today are against the idea of conversion therapy. They're not trying to convince someone that you should not be gay. Conversion therapy generally does not work, and it is banned in many countries. And I would say that the trend today is, even among almost all elements of Orthodoxy, not to try that path. I'm going to listen to some of your questions. I know some people have written in. I want to just read you a quote by Rav Aaron Feldman, who's a Rosh Yeshiva from Ner Yisrael, who says as follows: "A gay person is as beloved in God's eyes as any other Jew, and is as responsible as any Jew in all of the mitzvot. He is obligated to achieve life's goals by directing his life towards spiritual growth, sanctity, and perfection of his character, no less than any other Jew. He will merit the same share in the world to come which every Jew merits, minimally by being the descendant of Abraham Avinu, and maximally by totally devoting his life towards service to God." So it's a very difficult issue. I suggest that for further reading, you will Google the paper that came out in the last couple of days by Rabbi Kenny Brander, formerly of Boca Raton, Florida, and today the Rosh Yeshiva of Or Torah Stone, the Rabbi Riskin's organization. And it's a very beautiful, well-written piece and well thought out, but leaves room also for consideration of exactly where we're going to take this. But I think the bottom line is that we live today in a society where it's not the kind of closed shtetl ghetto society where people, everybody pretty much practice the same way, and they could banish or ostracize people or put them in cherem. This is just not the society of today. And when we're dealing with numbers that are so high, I think that this is particularly true. I want to take a look for a moment before I open it up, and I'll unmute everybody. I want to take a look at some of the chats. Sam Cohn says the Torah calls toeva for not only homosexuality, but one who cheats in business. That's true. And that's a good example as well, of course, that we seem to turn a blind eye to people who engage in those kind of practices, and be very selective who we decide that we're going to discriminate against. Does Judaism allow taking a baby from its mother in order to give it to a homosexual couple? Well, I'm not sure what that means, that we're not taking a baby. This is a free society. These are couples that are using surrogates or whatever the case may be. And we're not being asked whether to give it or not, but once it's done, we accept it as a fait accompli. I'm glad you brought up intermarriage, because there is another issue, and that is where I think people would draw the line, and that is putting in a shul bulletin or announcing from the pulpit of a shul a same-sex marriage or engagement. And just like we would not want to promote intermarriage by getting up and wishing a mazel tov to a intermarried couple, the same would be true for this as well. And I mentioned that before, that we have to be careful that nothing is being done to in any way to malign what Jewish law is all about. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to open this up, and if I can, let me see if I can open this up so anybody who wants to make a comment. Hold on. See if I can find a way to unmute everybody. I'm not sure if I'm the host. Hang on. But what you can, if you want to, you can certainly write a chat before I.
Okay.
Okay. Yes. Can you unmute? Can you unmute
Yes.
yourself? Okay. So yes, go ahead.
I would like to note that over the course of the last 70 years, in my lifetime, I've noticed a drastic shift with regard to homosexual behavior, from taboo and shame to celebration and total acceptance. Surrogacy, thought of nothing as nothing, to be normal, to have surrogate mothers to give to take a child away from its mother, to be celebrated. I've watched, when I went to Bennington in 1970, there were 3 out of 500 women who were lesbians. 3 years later, it was 200 out of 500. It was political. There was a celebration. There's something.
What's your question?
There is something wrong in the state of Denmark, because the acceptance of the person cannot be confused with the acceptance of the movement. I think, because I think we are gaslighting and grooming children and encouraging them to make a free will choice, which includes everything as equal, and it shouldn't be presented that way. I don't know how.
I hear what you're saying. I think we said from the very beginning that just like with violation of Shabbat, we are in no way trying to send a message that it is acceptable, or from a halachic point of view, to violate Shabbat. We're dealing with the fait accompli. We're dealing with somebody who, for whatever reason, has made a choice. And now we have to decide, are we going to ostracize them? Are we going to discriminate against them? Or are we going to still try to maintain a connection with them? And
totally, the individual, do not ostracize them. They're not getting up on the bima and committing acts, and it's nobody's business what they do privately. None of us are. I'm not addressing that when it's a fait accompli, that's a given. What I'm addressing is the societal green light and flag waving that takes vulnerable young people in a direction that they not necessarily would have chosen.
Well, how do you propose to stop them?
I think you have to. We have to speak clearly. I love you, but what you're doing is not.
I think
it's not kosher. That's it. I love you. Come to the table. Let's not talk about that at the Shabbos table.
I think that's appropriate. No different than people who are violating other mitzvot. I think we have to be careful not to decide that this sin is worse than another sin, especially when the Torah tells you essentially that there's no sin worse than violating Shabbat. Okay.
100%. That's an excellent example.
Any other comments?
Yeah. I just wanted to ask you something. Yes. I wanted to clarify something about what you said that happened at Yeshiva University. From what I understood, a group of people got together and basically declared they were gay and therefore they wanted rights. Why couldn't they have rights just as being ordinary people? I mean, straight people don't say I'm straight and therefore, I mean, was there something that they had been particularly...
Okay, I hear you. The answer to that is that there are special interest groups at Yeshiva University of people in different categories. And they also consider themselves in a different category, not unlike some of the other groups. And they petitioned the court.
What are those? Give me an example of another special interest group.
I don't know exactly, but let's say, for example, there might be those who are physically handicapped, and they have a club that meets that discusses their situation and explores ways that they can be.
That's a different category.
There is another example of
that's such an interesting.
That's a different category.
Yeah,
you can't have a club that says let's desecrate Shabbat. You can't have a club.
I don't want to get into a cross debate, but there are definitely different interest groups and clubs that meet afterwards, and they apparently qualify because the courts decided in their favor and said,
you can't have an intermarriage club.
Indeed, they are entitled to their own club. And not only did the courts decide in their favor, but in the end, Yeshiva University bowed to their wishes. I don't know how many. You could research that on your own and ask what are the extra.
That's coercion.
It's a coercion.
Okay, I don't want to get into a cross debate over it.
I think it's no, but the point I wanted to make is that I understand what you're saying, and I've heard this before, that we don't discriminate in this world with people who break other halachot, so therefore we can't do that, which I agree with. And what I think is, thank God about our society, it is no longer a criminal offense. Someone isn't going to go to prison because they have a different sexual orientation. But as with most movements, it tends to go extreme one way until it comes back in the middle. I mean, I'll be happy for the day where there's no gay pride march because it's not necessary. People are accepted for who they are when there's no more discrimination and bullying and terrible things.
I don't disagree with you because the addition of the word pride, like Black Lives Matter, seems to be, why don't you just say all lives matter, or just simply not trying to push it in people's faces. But okay, that's something that we did not decide for them. Okay, any other comments? Anybody, question or comment of anybody else, or any other situation that you'd like to? Somebody else asked about people being members of a shul. And that's actually up to a shul to decide. If you have a same-sex couple, for example, and they wish to join, I think the shul does have a right to decide if they would be admissible. And therefore, some have said, and Rabbi Brander suggests, that instead of having what's called family membership, you have household membership that would include all kinds of different permutations. Another issue that, of course, is a hot button issue is about transgenders of, a male who identifies as a female who is going to attend female functions, go to female locker rooms, etc. And this is being fought in a lot of different venues, including in sports, where they're still trying to come to grips whether a 6'8" male who identifies as a female can play in a girls' basketball league. And that's not been resolved. And societies, because there you really have a clash of values, because in a sense, you're disenfranchising the women who cannot, in basketball, let's say, who cannot compete with somebody who's a foot taller than they are. So not all of these issues have been dealt with. and they will be dealt with. And it'll be interesting to see, how they ultimately resolve it. It's not so much a religious issue there, but you can see that it crosses a lot of bounds. Anybody else who has any comment before we close? If not, then there's a lot of good reading material on this. Again, as I suggested, you can Google Rabbi Brander's comments and paper that came out a couple of days ago. And there's much more to say about the subject. Marcia, do you have a question? Are you raising your hand there? I don't see. But you're muted, so you'd have to unmute yourself. But okay, you're not. In any case, it's good getting back with you, and God willing, we shall be back again next week. And the plan is to meet at the same time at 5 o'clock. These times have to change because of Mincha, but at some point when the clock is more accommodating, we're going to try to set a time that we can meet on a regular basis. So thanks to everybody for joining in. Have a Shabbat Shalom. And I hope that we shall ultimately resolve all of our disputes in a very humane and accommodating way. Israel is obviously enmeshed in a very severe dispute and debate. And it's very sad that perhaps in another time we can talk about that, but it's enough dealing with religion, let alone politics. So everybody have a Shabbat Shalom, and we'll see you next time.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat